From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot on Potomac Watch with Joe Sternberg and Kate Batchelor Odell. Okay, let's turn to our European friends. Joe, you're parked in London where the conference was this weekend. Zelensky went and first met with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, then had a meeting that Starmer hosted with a variety of European leaders, including the French president. And he came out and made the following statement to the press.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week.
I have a couple reactions to that, Joe. First, good for Starmer at a moment of real peril, stepping in here and trying to put together some kind of European backstop. Good for him for putting up troops idea. But there's a big problem, and that is he still wants that American support backstop for whatever Europe supplies at the end of a peace agreement. Now, just to be clear for our listeners, Starmer's talking about troops on the ground after a peace agreement is signed, not right now. But when that is signed, he says he still wants that American backstop. And he was asked explicitly, well, is the minerals deal between the U.S. and Ukraine enough of that backstop? And he said, no, we'd need more. So take it away, Joe.
Well, Paul, the only thing that you said in there that I think isn't entirely correct is when you said that Keir Starmer wants a U.S. backstop, because actually he needs a U.S. backstop for this plan to work, which I think is kind of the problem our European allies are already running into here. If they had the capacity, if they had the defense industrial base and the money available in their budgets to give Ukraine the military support that it needs in order to change conditions on the ground so that Ukraine can negotiate a better peace deal with Putin, it would have happened at some point over the past 3 years. So I think that sort of the first issue that they run into is that when they talk about their commitment to being participants either in supporting Ukraine now or being participants in some kind of peacekeeping or security guarantee after a ceasefire, the obvious question is with what resources? And this is going to continue to be a real problem for them for the foreseeable future. And then because of that, for all of this talk about wanting to really step up and play a leading role, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Paul, that this is an important moment for Europe in terms of how they are thinking about what their role should be in shaping their own continent's future. But the reality is they are still heavily dependent on the U.S. to bring some kind of peace deal about, because as I've said, they can't give Ukraine the aid that Kyiv would need to change the conditions on the ground and negotiate a better deal without the U.S. And they're still going to be dependent on U.S. security guarantees after a deal is signed. So I think that it's great that they are finally having these conversations. And I think that Friday was a shocking moment for them. And Europe has realized that they must be more active participants in their own future. But it is a very long road from where they are right now in terms of their defense spending and their capabilities and sort of their strategic outlook to where they would need to be in order for this all to be possible. And unfortunately, I'm not sure Ukraine has that kind of time.
So let's try to put all of this in some larger context. Ideally, from the Keir Starmer point of view, the European point of view, they would put together this European idea, present it to the White House and say, see, Mr. President, President Trump, look at all we're committing. Look at all we're doing. We need you now to use your tremendous diplomatic skills and that U.S. backstop to try to forge a ceasefire, a peace deal, get Zelensky to sign the minerals deal with the U.S., as Kate suggested, and then get down on the negotiating table and see if we can negotiate some kind of ceasefire peace. Then the U.S. will say, yes, we're willing to provide some backstop. It's very clear there are going to be no troops American troops on the ground in Ukraine. There's going to be no NATO association by Ukraine. But maybe there can be some arms supplies from the U.S. to Ukraine. Maybe you can make Ukraine into a military porcupine that the EU had suggested if it were armed after a peace agreement. But as Kate suggested, there's no indication right now that Vladimir Putin is willing to accept any of that. So even if Zelensky came back and said, Mr. President, President Trump, sign the minerals deal. Let's go to the table. I'm willing to accept all kinds of the current territory that Russia has and so on. But is there a deal that Ukraine can accept that Trump can actually negotiate, Kate? I guess that is the million-dollar question. And then the other question is, does Trump really want to have any involvement in Ukraine other than getting his minerals out?
Well, one thing I'd note that if Trump does want more leverage to get a good deal, the threatening to cut off Ukraine idea is working at cross purposes with him. And Europeans should spend more on their defense. They should step up and provide even more financing of supporting Ukraine. That's all fine. But the United States is the one on the block with artillery and air defense assets that Ukraine needs to stay in the fight. And that's not going to change in the short term, that the U.S. is the one that can provide those. And so, Trump would expand his leverage by telling Putin, if you don't come to the table, Ukraine is never going to run out of artillery. They will never run out of Patriot missiles, and you're going to be bogged down, and you're going to have to do a second mobilization that is politically difficult and dangerous for you. And so you should come and negotiate with us. Of course, that's not going on. I grant that. But I do think that if Trump wants to increase his leverage, that is a powerful tool he can use. And also, Trump talking more about expanding U.S. military power would also really increase his leverage with Putin at a negotiating table. That's also not part of our current dialogue. He's only badgering the Europeans to increase their defense spending while the U.S. stays roughly steady at 3% of its economy. But your second question was whether Trump wants a deal. Paul, I think we have to think about the possibility that Trump does want a deal and he wants a durable peace. Let's take that assumption for a moment. But I think on Friday, what we saw is there's some suggestion that perhaps his vice president does not want a deal and does think that Ukraine can simply be walked away without too much political cost, and that will help Vance with the MAGA base. And so I think that's something the president should be very cautious about, because it did look in the Oval Office on Friday that Vance doesn't want a deal that I think perhaps Trump does want. So that, I think, is an accumulating risk.
Just on the latest news, as we're discussing this, a story broke over the wire that Trump criticized Zelensky on Monday for saying that the end of the war is very, very far away. That's what Zelensky said. And Trump said in response, this is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it much longer. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing and Europe, basically, quote unquote. So what that suggests is there is some risk here that Trump could lose patience with Zelensky and just cut off all U.S. aid to try to drive Zelensky in desperation to wherever Trump wants to take him, Joe.
Yeah, and can we point out how strange it is that, Trump came into office promising that he would be so different from administrations that have come before. I mean, all that we're missing is the big Russia reset button, and we would be back to where the Obama administration was in terms of trying to treat Putin as a reliable partner for peace in Europe. And so, I mean, one of the things that in general I'm finding baffling about the situation is that the sorts of experiences that we were supposed to have learned from, and the Trump administration, people always say that they want to be so different from the way we've done foreign policy in the past. And yet they're falling into exactly the same conciliatory approach to Russia that got us into this fix in the first place. So I think that one of the questions here is going to be, at what point, if anyone figures it out, will someone figure out that that is actually kind of the rut that they have fallen into here, and that it might benefit them to find some way out of it?
Well, we all want an end to this war, and we'd like to see it as soon as possible. I think it's a false choice to say that it's endless war versus some kind of immediate peace deal. But we'll see. This is a very, very dangerous moment, in my view, not just for Ukraine, not just for Europe, but also for the Trump presidency and America's standing in the world. All right, we're going to leave it at that optimistic note. And I want to thank Joe Sternberg. I want to thank Kate Odell and all of you for listening. We're every day on Potomac Watch.